Welcome to Days of Roar, a Detroit Tiger podcast brought to you by the Detroit Free Press. My name is Mark Gorash. I am here with Free Press beat writer Evan Petzold, who probably has not slept in 7 days between the Tigers winning lots of baseball games and the Major League Draft. Evan Petzold has put out about 43 articles in the last 7 days. I tip my hat to you, Ev. They don't pay you enough money. How you doing?
I'm hanging in there. I'm surviving. I'm ready to do a podcast. I'll tell you that much. I'm excited to talk about what's going on because what's going on is really good. And for the first time in a long time, things are really trending in the right direction for the Detroit Tigers. That's something that gets me excited, man. Like, as tired as I've been and as busy as this last week has been, winning baseball is always fun to talk about. It was a 5-2 record for the Tigers this week. 3-1 against the Cleveland Guardians at Comerica Park, 2-1 against the Los Angeles Dodgers at Comerica Park. In the last 10 games, the Tigers are 8-2. In the last 14 games, the Tigers are 10-4. It all kickstarted with that series in Cincinnati. It was the 3-game series where the Tigers swept the Reds in Cincinnati. There was a big, offensive outburst. We saw, Cole Keith going off. Parker Meadows came back up and was delivering. Some big hits from guys like Justin Henry Malloy, Wencio Perez. That has all continued into this past week, which is really encouraging to see. That's a really good thing for this group and for them to, take on the AL Central leaders in the Cleveland Guardians and to win 3 of 4. And then to have the Dodgers come to town. And you know what? You lose that first game on Friday night. You lose it 4-3, but then you come back with an epic 11-9 win. It's a walk-off fashion. And then on Sunday, a 4-3 win, also in walk-off fashion. I mean, that was pretty incredible what the Tigers were able to do. It's worth noting, like, the 2 games that they've lost over their last 10 were both by 1 run. It was 9-8 on Tuesday to the Guardians and then 3-4 on Friday to the Dodgers. Now, let's also keep in mind that, like, a lot of their wins over this stretch have been by just a few runs as well. They've been close games that have gone down to the wire. Do I expect the Tigers to win 8 of 10, for the rest of the season? Absolutely not. But again, they've shown some grit. Like, let's not forget that what happened on July 4th, the Tigers, it was their last game in Minneapolis against the Minnesota Twins. Kenta Maeda got absolutely rocked. And it was like, that was the low point for the Tigers in the season. Like, that was the low point for them where it was like, okay, this might be a point of no return. And then suddenly out of nowhere, they sweep the Reds. They take 3 of 4 against the Guardians, and then they take 2 of 3 against the Dodgers. The Tigers could have let it all slip away. They really could have. They could have let it all slip away after that rough Kenta Maeda start on July 4th. But you got to tip your cap to them because they came back and they've been playing good baseball over the last 10 games especially. We'll see if it's going to continue coming out of the All-Star break.
Well, look, it's just baseball, man. When it looks the darkest sometimes, all of a sudden you start playing well. I mean, there are lots of numbers we're going to go over maybe in the second half of the pod about how the Tigers are playing in July. But all I'm going to say is it was fun. I was there yesterday. The Tigers made endless unforced errors for 3 days and still won 2 baseball games. The Dodgers, thank goodness, pitched Ramirez twice, basically handed him 2 games, could not field 2 bunts yesterday. And shout out to Zach McKinstry because that was a hell of a good swing to lead off the 9th with a triple. Been a lot of fun, a lot of drafting, a lot of things about the future, but basically some winning baseball. I'm not sure all of it was good baseball, but it was winning baseball.
Hey, Mark, they'll take winning baseball, right? I mean, you can't knock that, right? I mean, anytime you win, you got to be happy with it, no matter how you got there. And again, like, they showed a lot of grit. It was a lot of close games. They were able to fight and claw for, make comebacks. Like, they never feel like they're out of it. They're going to play their full 27 outs. And I know a lot of that sometimes seems like it's coach speak from manager AJ Hinch, but you know what? There's a belief in that clubhouse, right? Exactly. There's a belief in that clubhouse. Those guys believe that no matter what happens, they're going to be able to fight and claw and have a chance at the end. But I want to put things in perspective because I do think that it's important. Like, the Tigers, where they're at in the division, where they're at in the standings when it comes to postseason, hopes, like, they still have a really long ways to go. They're 12 games back in the American League Central. They're 7 games back in the wild card. So they still have a lot of work to do, in this back half of the season coming out of the All-Star break. And right now, like, you look at where they stack up, it's the Cleveland Guardians at 58 and 37. The Minnesota Twins at 54 and 42. The Kansas City Royals at 52 and 45. The Detroit Tigers at 47 and 50. And the Chicago White Sox at 27 and 71. So yeah, the Tigers, I mean, it's 47 and 50, 12 games back in the division, 7 games back in the wild card. Like there's still a lot of work that needs to be done. And also a lot of people talk about the All-Star break like it's the halfway point. To be realistic, there's only 65 games remaining. Like that's only 40% of the 162 game schedule. So a lot of these games were played before the All-Star break. You only got about 40% of your games left. So if the Tigers are going to make a push, they're going to have to keep rolling and playing, honestly, like out of their mind good. So we'll see if they can do it. I mean, again, coming out of the break, you got 3 games against the Toronto Blue Jays and then a bunch of division games. You got the Blue Jays for 3, and then you have the Cleveland Guardians for 4 games, the Minnesota Twins for 3 games, and then 2 more games against the Guardians to finish up July. Those are going to be some big games. And then even right into August at the very beginning, Kansas City Royals, 4 games at home at Comerica Park to start August. That's going to be a really important stretch to see if the Tigers can actually make a push. Right now, I'm a little bit pessimistic, but if they finish July strong, who knows what can happen.
2 things. I never pay attention to who we're playing. I only pay attention to how we're playing. And I don't think anything illustrates that premise more than the last 15 days of July. 2, how they're going to get back in the race and all that kind of discussion. Yeah, I don't pay any attention to that either. Just try to win every day. The more you win, the more those things present themselves. I don't think in El Central or the wild card, there's really much to discuss, at least until you maybe put together another 10 out of 14, something even longer than that. And those things will take care of themselves. All right, it's time to get to the big 2. Question 1 of the big 2, the Tigers drafted 3 high school players with their first 3 picks in the 2024 Major League Baseball draft, including shortstop Bryce Rainer at number 11 overall. We discussed him quite a bit last week. He felt to us like Santa Claus leaving a giant present on your porch. Who are these 3 players? What do we know about them? And what do we think about these 3 picks? And of course, in order to discuss them with full clarity and knowledge, we've enlisted an expert. Ev, who do we have this week?
Yeah, this week we're joined by Tyler Jennings, Director of Draft Content for Prospects Live. Tyler, first and foremost, thank you for joining us.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you guys for having me on. I'm excited to do this with you guys.
No doubt. So the Tigers obviously taking 3 high school players. We've got Harvard Westlake School shortstop Bryce Rainer at number 11 overall. He's from Los Angeles, California. Edmond North High School right-hander Owen Hall at number 49 overall. He's from Edmond, Oklahoma. Corona High School left-hander Ethan Schiefelbein at number 72 overall. He's from Corona, California. Tyler, what can you tell us about these 3 players in particular? What can you tell us about the draft strategy, taking 3 high school picks? Like, what do you think about the Tigers haul here on day 1?
I think it was one of the better hauls, in my opinion, throughout all of day 1. It's 3 solid upside guys that you're essentially going to be paying probably maybe a little bit over than you'd like. But I think at the end of the day, like Rainer comes at a bit of a discount at 11. I think that one was probably just something that you're really giddy to get at 11 as well. Like the way the top of the draft really shaped out with Bazana being 1, we thought JJ was going to be the first overall pick, and he fell straight to 7. So there's a lot of chaos really right off the rip. And I think that ultimately led to the fact that like Jack Caglianone fell out of the top 5. JJ Weatherholt fell at 7. So you're looking at guys that really fell down the board pretty quickly that you didn't think that you would get at 6 or 7 if you're KC or St. Louis, to where maybe you put the prep guys on the back burners. And I think that's what happened. Like Connor Griffin was the first prep off the board at 9. Then Bryce Rainer was obviously the pick at 11. And with Rainer, we talked about the other day, Evan, like the body does remind you a bit of like Corey Seager, Colson Montgomery, where it's a big, lanky shortstop with physicality that already moves pretty well. The bat got better as the season went along. Summer circuit last year wasn't great, but he came out this year. Bat looked quicker. He looked a lot more stronger. And it just, everything really clicked for him. I think that's the biggest thing. It's just everything really clicked in the way it should have. And we thought that he was going to be maybe some guy that goes to school coming out of summer circuit last year. But then he came out this year and just really blew us all away with the tools. So I'm really excited to see how that works out for Detroit. Owen Hall is a guy I really enjoyed on the summer circuit last year too, personally. Very fun family to talk to. I've had a bunch of experience talking to them. But the biggest thing for him is the fastball. The fastball is really, really hoppy at the top of the zone, which when I mention hoppy, we're talking about carry on the fastball, like inverted or induced vertical break, really. We get somewhere close to like 18 inches, maybe even 20 inches, and you'll lose a little bit of that with the transition to pro ball. But worked on a slider, working out a splitter. There's a curveball in there, really athletic right-hander as well. That's a really good pick. And Schiefelbein kind of really falls into that same mold too, where there's some deception there. There's a good fastball in the low 90s that really jumps on guys from the left side. He tunnels it well with a good curveball. And he's got a changeup in there that he kind of uses, not a whole ton, but he still throws it in there. But he threw a complete game at AHSI this year, which is a huge high school tournament out here in the Carolinas. And just blew guys away with a fastball curveball combo that really just works well. He's really lanky, really young too. I think he's something like 18 and change on draft day yesterday. Really do like that pick. I think it's a really good upside pick overall. And there's a lot of upside in these 3 picks for you guys.
So Tyler, let's talk about Rainer for a second. Left-hand hitter, physical, tall. What kind of things should we expect as he fills out a little bit? I mean, probably not a ton of range, but these days range is a little less emphasized as a defender. Even though they've taken away shifts, the way they position players, it's kind of been de-emphasized a little bit. What kind of hands does he have? Is he sure-handed? I mean, everybody's playing up the bat, but you have to be a pretty reliable defender to stay at short in a major league environment. Talk to us a little bit about that and how you project and what kind of timeline you think he might have.
Yeah, absolutely. So with the shortstop, you mentioned the range. I think it's been de-emphasized a little bit recently. With the body type for him, mentioning the guys like Seager and Montgomery as like close body comps for that, there were concerns that they could move to third base at the next level. And we haven't really seen that happen just yet. I think Colson might be moving to third base here in short term. And I think Rainer may have that down the line if, say, as he adds weight, starts to lose some of that athleticism a little bit and kind of starts becoming a little bit more clunky with his motions at shortstop. But with the hands, they're super soft. They're really reliable. He's sure-handed. Really glides across the infield too. It's for a kid of his size, moving as well as he does is pretty impressive. As for a timeline, it's definitely, he's on the older side of the prep class this year. He just turned 19. I would imagine give it about 3 to 4 years on that one. He mainly goes oppo in game. He's still got to learn to pull the ball a little bit more. So there's a little bit to work with. But as he fills out, there's going to be more power in that bat. Has some more loft to it to his pull side. I think you're going to have a really solid hitter overall there.
Owen Hall obviously is the name that stands out when you look at the fastball. I've heard that it tops out at 98 miles an hour. And then, the slider is really good as well. Like, what's the next step for him in his development? When the Tigers get their hands on him and they get him into player development, what do you expect them to do with him to try to get the most out of him, to make him a frontline starter, which might be his upside?
Yeah, I think the upside there you mentioned is spot on, really. The biggest thing for him, when I saw him last year, the secondary command wasn't all that great. And I think even Owen admitted that to me when we talked to him after the game. Like, had a little trouble landing the slider, landing the curveball for strikes, and he's been working on a splitter. And I think the biggest thing is obviously trying to get to land the strikes more with the curveball and slider. If you're able to live in the zone more, get ahead 0-1 on guys and start playing with the fastball up in the zone, I think that's a good strategy for him. The fastball is already fairly optimized, and I would imagine there's not much more in there. He has touched actually 99 this spring, is the report I've heard. It's obviously really tough to go out to Oklahoma and get views on that kid, obviously, but like get up to 99, sits in the mid 90s with really good hop. But obviously, secondary command is going to be the big thing to work on. And I think if you really do get him to where he's like laying that slider early in the count to steal strikes and gets fastball late, I think that's going to be a really deadly combo for him. I think the upside is definitely mid-rotation. Could even look at someone maybe even higher than that if everything works out.
Okay, and then how about Ethan Schiefelbein too? Like, what's the upside there for him? It seems like he's a low velocity kind of guy. So when people maybe see him for the first time, if he's a low velocity, is that just kind of his pitching style? That's something to worry about, is it? And I guess kind of what does that mean for his upside and what his future might be? And what's the biggest step forward for him that he needs to take with his development?
Yeah, he's a bit more interesting with Schiefelbein. You mentioned the low 90s, and just the way that he's built. He's like 6'4", 170, really projectable, really athletic too. Like there's not a ton of effort involved in that delivery whatsoever. And I think he's going to be somebody that does throw a bit harder as he gets, more physically matured. And by that, I mean, just like adding more muscles to that frame, getting somewhere closer to like maybe 195, 200 pounds and see how everything goes from there. But with the tunneling ability between his fastball and his curveball really stands out for me. Like gets up to 94 with the fastball, good carrying traits at the top of the zone, but he'll land that curveball for strikes, and the command of it's really, really good. That was something that I took away from his summer circuit last year, was like he can land that curveball for strikes, get ahead with the fastball, and just blow hitters away. There is a changeup that needs to be developed a little bit more. Personally, I think that's a big focal point for him, is try to work on the third pitch, really turn himself into a kind of guy where if he needs a viable weapon against right-handed hitters, the changeup's right there for him. He doesn't have to rely on the fastball to get whiffs at the top of the zone, or he doesn't have to rely on the curveball, either back foot or even down in the zone to get whiffs. So having that third pitch is a big focal point for him, I think. Overall, just adding more weight as well. If you can get him into the more mid-90s consistently, I think you're going to lock a lot more upside into this kind of profile.
Pretty advanced feel for spin, we've been told, probably bodes well for developing a changeup. Would you agree with that, Tyler, or no?
Yeah, I agree with that. I think if you have the basis for spin already set down, you can start working on that changeup alone as it is, and really just try and grind out what you need for him to do and get command and feel in the right spot for him.
Tyler, obviously, as you know, we're in the American League Central covering the Tigers. What can you tell us about Travis Bazzana, drafted by the Cleveland Guardians? How about Jack Caglianone, drafted by, the Kansas City Royals? And then obviously Hagen Smith, drafted by the Chicago White Sox. Those are three players taken ahead of Bryce Rainer, who I'm sure we're going to see in the AL Central one day. Can you kind of walk us through each of those picks and maybe what fans should know?
Yeah, absolutely. With Bazzana, you're looking at a second baseman, but I've thrown the comp out to the guys in the room with me here. Maybe it could be like a Dustin Pedroia light, kind of similar body styles, similar styles of play, and the bat speed is just otherworldly. The power really stood out this year for Bazzana. Really, pull side has an opposite field power to go with that as well. But the pure hit tool is just something that really stands out for me. High contact, low chase guy, really covers his own very, very well. If there's one little red flag for Bazzana, it's maybe like low and away. And that's something I've talked to a few guys where it's like, that could be concerned moving down the line as he sees more advanced stuff. But I think overall, like that's about as surefire as a contact-oriented guy with power you're going to get in this kind of draft class. With Caglianone, I was actually kind of shocked they took him as a two-way. Personally, like I kind of sat here this year and was like, he hasn't really developed as an arm per se. He showed flashes of what he could be at the start of the year, but strikes never came around. He lost velocity, looked really tired down the stretch really too. But the bat just really stood out. Like the contact got a lot better, started walking more, wasn't as aggressive. I think there's a lot more upside as a mashing left-handed hitter at Kauffman than, say, an arm. But I think overall, like you're looking at potentially 70, maybe even 80 power with Caglianone with field to hit. That's really impressive for a guy of that caliber who's long, super lanky, and repeating is really tough for a guy of that size, and he does it very, very well. With Hagen, that was something I didn't expect for fifth overall. Like I thought he might fall a little bit outside the top 5, but Chicago pairing him, say, potentially with like Garrett Crochet, assuming, something funky happens at the deadline here and he's not traded. There's another lefty, Noah Schultz, in that farm system that you could pair him up with. They've got a deadly trio of lefties right now. So I think that bodes well for how you kind of project that moving forward. It's a really good fastball that really misses a ton of bats. It's a low launch, low approach angle in terms of like it comes in very flat to the plate, and it really defies hitters' logic on how the pitch comes at them a little bit. Missed bats at a 42% clip and has a really good slider to go with it. Changeup is going to be focal point there, I think, because it's been mainly just 2 pitches that he's used this year. But I think overall, like Hagen Smith's got some of the best upside in this entire class for an arm, and I think Chicago is probably going to utilize it, or at least optimize it to their best advantage this year.
All right, Hagen, that's a really, really good arm, and it's not style-wise similar to Crochet, but if you remember, Crochet actually came really fast for the White Sox, started out in the bullpen pretty quickly after the draft, and wouldn't be shocked if Smith actually was in the major leagues pretty quickly for the White Sox. As far as being paired with Crochet, I don't think there's much chance at all that the White Sox don't deal Crochet. But, between Schultz and Smith, that's a pretty good start of a rotation for the White Sox. And yeah, the division obviously did well. And I think sometimes we underrepresent how well the Twins draft. Twins always kind of subtly do a really good job in their drafting, and we haven't really talked about them. They did draft a couple of shortstops. So, but the division, yeah, pretty good job of drafting yesterday. And the AL Central is no longer a doormat in baseball, I guess, huh?
Absolutely.
All right, Tyler. Hey, thank you so much for coming on. And we really enjoy and appreciate all the insight, both with the Tigers and then also with what other teams did, there in the American League Central. Thank you for joining us, and enjoy days 2 and 3. Good luck.
Yeah, thank you, man. Thank you guys for having me on, and I'm going to do my best to enjoy it before I get home tonight.
Everyone, that was Tyler Jennings, Director of Draft Content at Prospects Live. There's more to discuss, including question 2 of the Big Two. But first, let's take a break.
All right. Question 2 of the Big Two. The Tigers enter the All-Star break having won 2 or 3 games over the Dodgers, 2 straight series against division leaders, and 3 straight series overall. So the question becomes, should the Tigers be buyers or sellers at the July 30th trade deadline? Ev, thoughts?
Respectfully, I'm going to say the Tigers should be sellers. I think they've always been sellers. I think that's always been the game plan. Again, we just referenced where they were at in the division and where they're at in the wild card. You're 12 games back in the division. You're 7 games back in the wild card. There's still a long ways to go. And again, the plan was always to trade Jack Flaherty. I've talked about this before, that back in spring training, there was somebody that told me that no matter what happened to the Tigers, the game plan was to move Flaherty. Because again, that's the only way that they can get pieces back to help, ignite their offense for the future. You trade a guy like Jack Flaherty, assuming his value is good coming off of the back injury that he's dealt with this season. And even if it's not, you can still get a couple pieces that can help you in the future. I think the Tigers are obviously very forward focused. Look at how they're drafting, picking up so many high schoolers, right? They are very, very forward focused. And I think that kind of speaks to what they did in the offseason too. They went out and they got a Mark Canha and a Gio Urshela, but also they didn't go crazy with a big trade to get, a young bat who's going to be here for a really long time. They wanted to earmark at bats for young players. And that's what they've done, trying to give opportunities to Parker Meadows and Colt Keith and Wenzel Perez and Justin Henry Malloy now. This has been kind of the Tigers' plan, and just looking forward to the future. So as fun as things have been, and as much as it'd be oh yeah, go out and just go get another big bat and, maybe go get another arm, it's probably not going to happen. I don't see it happening that way. It doesn't mean that we can't have the feel-good story of hey, this team is playing a lot better right now, because they are. I just don't see them being buyers whatsoever, no matter what happens. Even if they finish July strong, even if they come out of the break and they, sweep maybe they sweep the Blue Jays, and maybe they win a few against Cleveland, and then maybe they take, a couple from Minnesota. I still don't see a way in which the Tigers are legit buyers, just because of the direction of the organization and what seems to be Scott Harris's vision of a 2026, 2027 type timeline for legit contention. If they're not going to be a team that's going to push for the World Series, I don't see why they're going to try to trade the farm. That's not happening. So yeah, sorry to let people down, but that's just kind of how I see this thing, kind of unfolding based on what I've heard. Tigers are going to be sellers. You're looking at Jack Flaherty on the trade market, catcher Carson Kelly on the trade market. We'll see if there's any market there for Mark Canha. He's been playing very poorly since May 1st. He's also dealt with a hip issue. Now he's got a wrist issue. Who knows how healthy he actually is, but at the same time, he does get on base. Maybe they could get something for him, but I'm not so sure. Gio Urshela, who really wants Gio Urshela on their roster? I'm not sure there's a whole lot of teams that do. The metrics are kind of split on him when it comes to how he plays defensively at third base. I think he's pretty solid from the eye test. But again, with the bat, he's been pretty ice cold since May 1st until this last 10 games or so. I don't know if a team really views Gio Urshela as being an answer or a piece to the puzzle. And when I say a team, I mean a team that's trying to contend for the World Series. So again, I think the 2 biggest trade chips, probably you're looking at Jack Flaherty, Carson Kelly. I'm not sure if you can get anything from Mark Canha. Not sure if you can get anything for Gio Urshela. And then obviously the 2 relievers the Tigers have, they got Shelby Miller, They also have Andrew Chafin. Both of those guys have team options for next year. For a guy like Shelby Miller, considering the way the season's gone and it hasn't been great, maybe the Tigers are better off trying to fix him and, bringing him back for next year and then seeing what they can do at next year's trade deadline. If maybe moving him is an idea that they have. Also, Andrew Chafin, as good as he's been, that's kind of the only guy you have in your bullpen who's actually missing bats right now, at least at the back end. So again, he's pretty valuable. He also has the team option. And if you don't really have a closer for this team right now, I don't know, maybe Andrew Chafin can be the closer not only for this year, but also for next year if you want to pick up team option. So the Tigers do have some different options, but I think they're sellers all the way. Mark, are you on board with me there?
Let me simplify this for you, Mr. Evan Petzold. The Detroit Tigers have untouchable players in Riley Green and Colt Keith. Could be untouchable player in Tarek Skubal. Likely untouchable player in Reese Olson. Every other person on the major league roster, every other person on the 40-man is tradable. Every single one of them. There isn't a guy I wouldn't listen on. Even guys like Tyler Holton and Jason Foley, I'd listen on anybody. A guy that you're going to get phone calls on for sure is Carson Kelly. You might even get some calls on Jakey Rogers. Jakey Rogers, I'm a little more hesitant to deal just because he's so important to the pitching staff. But let's not candy coat it. They should be open to trading literally everyone except let's add Kerry Bonds Carpenter and his terrible back to the untouchable pile. So you probably have 5 players that are untouchable. The other 35 on the 40, all tradable. The other 21 on the roster, all dealable. So don't be surprised if guys you weren't expecting to be dealt are dealt. And if it was up to me, besides trying to get some bats that are close to the major leagues, I would be trying to, see if I could land any hard-throwing reliever, 97 to 100, that you think you can optimize. The Tigers have a very mediocre bullpen at this point in time, devoid of any hard throwers. Every team has really hard throwers. Look at your own division. Emmanuel Clase, maybe the best closer in baseball, throws 100. Duran, maybe the best closer in baseball, throws 102. Okay. Michael Kopech, for heaven's sake, throws 100. He's the closer of the White Sox. The only team in our division that doesn't really have a closer or much of a bullpen is Kansas City. They're 7 games over 500, for heaven's sake. So let's be real. Let's not talk about what this team is because they played well for 14 days. I think their minor league depth, as we've seen this year, is pretty sparse. I would be trying to move every player they could for some wild cards, especially arms, especially bullpen arms, because to be really blunt about it, the players they have to trade, those are the kind of guys you trade them for. So what's your thoughts about what I just had to say?
Yeah, no, I think you hit the nail on the head when it comes to what they need to do. You got to move guys. You got to get more into the system. I would love for the Tigers to try to target some upper level type players, especially with, their main pieces. When you're talking about Jack Flaherty and Carson Kelly, and we'll see if they deal anybody else that's controllable. Those are hard deals to make, at this time of year, right? Those are hard deals when it comes to a reliever like a Jason Foley, for example, who's controllable, has a lot of years on his contract, but you're going to want a lot back. Those are just hard to pull off at this time, but especially with the guys who are on expiring contracts. When we're talking about Mark Hanna, Gio Urshela, Carson Kelly, Jack Flaherty, I would love to see the Tigers with their 2 main pieces of that group, Jack Flaherty, Carson Kelly, really try to go after some upper level type players, guys at the AA level or the AAA level, where maybe the Tigers can get a AA, hitter who is going to be in AAA by the end of the year. And maybe he starts next year in AAA, but then by the halfway point, he's really knocking on the door, hopefully even pounding on the door to get a promotion midway through 2025. I think that's what the Tigers, should really be looking for, especially at this time of year. When you talk about contenders, not a lot of contenders are going to want to give away guys on the cusp of the big leagues or ready to break into the big leagues, at the trade deadline, because again, those contending teams trying to make a push for the postseason, they're one injury away sometimes from calling a guy like that up. So again, it's the same old when it comes to, should the Tigers trade Tarek Skubal or should they not? I always talk about the Jackson Holiday, conversation, right? It's like, it'd be so easy. Just trade Tarek Skubal for Jackson Holiday straight up. And it's like, well, if you're the Orioles and Gunnar Henderson, who's been arguably like a top 3 player in baseball, if he gets hurt, well, the Orioles are going to need Jackson Holiday to come up and play and help them push for the postseason and try to win the World Series. Like, that's a really hard deal to make at the trade deadline just because of how much value those players have first and foremost, and then also how much value they have as, potential needs when it comes to getting into the postseason and making the playoffs. So it's hard to trade for guys that are like AAA and big league ready at the deadline. So that's why I would love to see the Tigers go after, a Hao Yu Lee type of player who they went out and got in the Michael Lorenzen deal last year. I thought that was a great trade for Scott Harris, and it's worked out great so far. We saw Hao Yu Lee playing in the Futures game alongside Max Clark. That's a good trade. And so I think for the Tigers to target more of those type of bats and then, develop them through the system as we go, that's a good deal. And look, if the Tigers decide to move on from Tarek Skubal in the offseason, that's when you shoot for, your big league ready type players, guys that have all 6 years of team control. That's when you really go for those kind of players, because those are the players that teams might be more willing to part ways with in the offseason, whereas, not so much at the trade deadline. So no, I don't think the Tigers are going to trade Tarek Skubal at the trade deadline, by the way. I do not foresee that happening, but I also think that they might do so in the offseason. We'll have to wait and see on that, obviously, but it would make a lot more sense to make that move in the offseason than as opposed to, trying to do it at the trade deadline. That's something to watch for the long term, though.
All right. We'll discuss the trade deadline a lot more, maybe next week and obviously the week after, because right before the trade deadline, we're going to do a pod, just the way the calendar sets up. But, speculating on this stuff is all a lot of fun, but a lot of things change in 2 weeks, and we'll come back and address it. All right. Tigers have been pretty stellar, as we've discussed, in the month of July, 110 out of 14. I pulled up some data about how they performed this month. I want to kind of discuss it with you for a minute, because it's pretty damn impressive, to be really honest with you. And when you win 10 out of 14, you should have some impressive underlying data. Here we go. In the month of July, Tigers have amassed 4 WAR from their position players. That's second in baseball. That's Fangraphs WAR. Their slash line as a team, miraculously, after being one of the most boring, inefficient, poor offensive teams in baseball for 3 months, their slash in July, 274, 339, a robust 508 slug, and a 137 WRC plus as a team, which is second in baseball. Runners in scoring position, they've slashed 266, 334, 458, and a 118 WRC plus. That's seventh in baseball. They have a 363 weighted on base average, WOBA. That's first in baseball. Their ERA from starting pitchers that you think have done very well this month is 4.95, 20th in baseball. Strangely, in one of Evan Petzold's favorite data points, they have a 360 xFIP. That's fourth in baseball. So as poorly as their starters have been, they've actually thrown better than you think. May have something to do with Will Vest allowing every inherited base runner he ever sees to score being charged to the starter. And their bullpen has a 3.12 ERA, which is 10th, yet a 4.59 xFIP, which is 27th, which still corresponds to what I discussed earlier, because their bullpen has been pretty bad, even though their ERA is pretty good. What do you think of all these interesting numbers, Ev?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important to look at how the individuals are performing as well on top of that, right? And it all starts with the offense for this team. We've talked about it, even going back to the offseason, right? Like, everything depended on what the Tigers were going to provide offensively. We knew the pitching staff was going to be good, and that's proven to be the case, specifically with the starting rotation. You're right, it's a mediocre bullpen, but starting rotation has been solid. You got Tarek Skubal, Jack Flaherty, and obviously Reese Olson as kind of that three-headed monster in the rotation. They've been really good. The Tigers have gotten some gritty starts from Casey Mize. Obviously, Kenta Maeda now moving to the bullpen, but Cater Montero has come up and he's been solid. So I think you got to tip your cap to what the rotation has done to keep things afloat. But what we're seeing recently when it comes to the July performance, it all comes down to the offense. Like Colt Keith is hitting 370 with a 1.267 OPS. Riley Green is hitting 380 with a 1.086 OPS. Justin Henry Malloy is hitting 303 with a 924 OPS. Carson Kelly is hitting 259 with an 862 OPS. Gio Urshela is hitting 298 with an 809 OPS, right? Like these are guys that are performing above their weight, specifically when it comes to, Carson Kelly, Gio Urshela, and most certainly Justin Henry Malloy. Colt Keith, though, like let's look at WRC plus. We love WRC plus. We like to talk about it. Colt Keith, it's a 247 WRC plus. Like league average is 100. Colt Keith is at 247. Is Colt Keith going to be a 247 WRC plus player for the rest of the season? Absolutely not. Riley Green, is he going to be a 205 WRC plus player for the rest of the season? Absolutely not. So like the offense is red hot right now and it's fun to watch. It's enjoyable. It's the first time all season that they've actually been able to do something offensively. Like finally, this offense has a pulse. But again, Justin Henry Malloy, 160 WRC plus, that's 60% above league average when it comes to his offensive production. Like, is that really sustainable? I'm not so certain that's the case, right? Even Colt Keith, again, to be 147% above league average production, like that's not sustainable. So yes, you got to tip the cap to the offense because the guys are getting the job done. But at the same time, I would be blown away if we get to the end of the season and we're still feeling the exact same way as we are about, these games that they played in July. But don't get me wrong, like that's why they're performing so well. And like, got to give credit where credit is due. Over the last 12 games, of which 11 Colt Keith has started, it's 5 home runs. 5 of his 9 home runs in the last 12 games. 7 walks, 14 strikeouts. He's got a double in there, a couple triples. Like, this is a guy who's raking right now, and he's coming into his own. He's continued to make adjustments. The game has now slowed down for him, where he's seeing spin out of the hand, and he's seeing it come in almost in slow-mo, and he's able to make good swing decisions every single time, and he's pounding the baseball. He's coming up big in big moments. And that swing that he had against the Los Angeles Dodgers on Saturday to tie the game in the 9th inning, that was the first big swing that we've seen from Colt Keith in his big league career. I know he had the 2-homer game against the Cincinnati Reds, but big moment, bottom of the 9th, 2 outs, game-tying 2-run home run against the Dodgers. That's a really big swing. That's one that when Colt Keith has a long career and we look back, that's a home run that maybe gets played, when we're looking at his career highlights, when his career is all said and done. So Colt Keith has really come into his own. The game seems to be slowing down a little bit for Justin Henry Malloy. Riley Green, he keeps doing what he's doing, even without a ton of power in July. But again, is it all sustainable? I don't think so. But you still got to tip your cap because it's really fun to watch right now. And you are seeing some young players come into their own. I think, you have to give credit in that sense. Even Wensiel Perez, sure, he's only hitting 240 in July. But he's also had some big swings and some big moments. He's done a good job out of the leadoff spot, I feel like, setting the tone at times. So, it's good vibes right now from the offense, but is it going to stick? Who knows?
Things I've loved, Colt Keith, what you really got to love is, love the power, man. Love rising to the moment the other night. First pitch, dong to tie the game. Are you kidding me? That was something special, but he's basically morphed into a 2024 version of Chase Utley almost lately. It's the other thing you really got to love and things you and I love. He walked 1 time in the month of June. He's walked 7 times in the month of July. Colt Keith had an 11% walk rate in the minor leagues. His walk rate was under 5. That is something really showing growth and maturity as a hitter. Got to love that. The other thing, I've been pretty tough on Jahan. I got to tell you, there was a ton of swing and miss. It was something Evan Petzold did not like either. But last 2.5 weeks has hit for some power and, more importantly, modified his approach a little bit and has really started to hit the ball hard going the other way and taking his base hits. And you can see it. You can see it a bunch of times. He's giving himself up and hit the ball hard to right field for a single. And yesterday in the 9th inning, and I was pretty much almost on top of him when he did this. He absolutely scorched a shot to the right of second base to tie the game with McKinstry on third. Those are pretty mature at bats. He's also, walking at over 10%, still in the big leagues, and he's hitting the ball more consistently, kind of cut down on some strikeouts lately and hitting the ball hard. So you got to love that stuff. Those are things you can build on. You really got to like that stuff. As far as Riley Green, he's not hitting as many dongs the last 2 weeks, but how many times has he hit the ball to left field for doubles or hits? And you and I have discussed all year, the best version of Riley Green is the version that hits the ball to left field while he's doing other things. And you've seen that a ton in the last couple of weeks.
Hey, Mark, I want to be fair on Colt Keith, too, when we talk about what he's been able to do. It's not just like in the month of July. He's been actually really good since the beginning of May. If you go back to May 1st, he ranks 28th in baseball. Among 150 qualified hitters, he ranks 28th in baseball with a 138 WRC plus. He's hitting 299 since May 1st. Okay, like Colt Keith has been doing this for a minute now, and it's really impressive. Obviously, he's turned it on as of late here in July, but he's been really good. Again, 28th out of 150 qualified hitters is really good. You know who he is one spot ahead of on that list? It's Riley Green. Riley Green is at 29th among 150 qualified hitters. Riley Green has a 137 WRC plus. Colt Keith has a 138 WRC plus. Just to make sure people remember, WRC plus quantifies run creation and normalizes it. It allows us to compare players who play in different ballparks, even in different eras. Basically, it's adjusted. So WRC plus of 100 is league average. 150 would be 50% above league average. So since May 1st, Colt Keith, 38% above league average for his offensive performance. Riley Green, 37% above league average for his offensive performance. Got to tip the cap to Colt Keith over and over and over again. I mean, this is a young guy who got a big contract and obviously was, struggling out of the gate. And then since May 1st, to rank 28th among 150 qualified hitters as a 22-year-old, I mean, come on now. Like, this guy is the real deal. He's here to stay. There's no doubt about it. Colt Keith's only going to get better and better. And, watching a red-hot Colt Keith is a lot of fun, and it makes the Tigers lineup look extremely different. It's no longer a one-man show, Riley Green putting the team on his back. This is a two-man tandem now. We'll see what they can do the rest of the season.
Yeah, it's a lot more fun for Evan and Mark because after 6 or 8 weeks of just dreary, terrible baseball these last 2 weeks, winning is a lot more fun to talk about. Good performance is a lot more fun to talk about. And it gives you a little hope for the future. So, all right, let's transition into, I'll tell you what. Let's take a break. We're going to be back, and we'll finish up. We'll be back in 60. All right, so let's quickly go over a few things that have occurred in the last week. Jack Flaherty finally got back on the mound after a 14-day layoff, and he was pretty damn good. So how do you think he looked? How do you think the back seems to feel? That's hard for us to know. And how important is this first start after the break? Because it pretty much cements some level of trade value for him. So give me your impressions.
Yeah, first off, it was great to see Jack Flaherty back on the mound and healthy again. Like you said, 14-day layoff. He pitched June 27th against the Los Angeles Angels, and then he did not pitch again until July 11th. That's a pretty long stretch to go without pitching in a game. He came back. He threw 6 innings. He allowed 1 run on 2 hits and 2 walks with 4 strikeouts. He got up to 83 pitches. It was good to see him back in action. It was good to see him being able to complete a start. The stuff looked really good. Obviously, limited the damage. There were 2 walks, 2 hits, but only 1 run on the board. Yeah, and then coming out of it, he said that the back felt good. Like, he feels pretty good about it going forward. Obviously, he gets now a long break with the All-Star break. That kind of changes things, right? It's almost like instead of going back out there after 5 days, he gets a long stretch. He's going to pitch on Friday or Saturday, one of those 2 days against the Toronto Blue Jays. If he pitches on Saturday, he would actually be lined up to pitch on the July 30th trade deadline. That game is at 1:10 p.m. The trade deadline is at 6 p.m. Again, I don't know if maybe trying to line him up for that day could be leverage. I don't know if Scott Harris would say, oh, well, we're about to send him out if you don't make this deal. I don't know what the deal with that would be. But again, maybe he starts on Friday and he's not even lined up for the trade deadline. Either way, yeah, it's good. It's good to see him back out there. I thought the stuff was solid. Everything seemed firm. It really depends, though, for him. Like, it's more about how he bounces back. So I do think the long layoff, gives him a good opportunity to bounce back. The big question is going to be coming out of the break. I mean, he has at least 2 or 3 more starts before the July 30th trade deadline. Seems like it might just be 2 starts. And obviously, those are going to be on the regular rest. So it's going to be interesting to see how is he able to bounce back between the first start coming out of the All-Star break and the second start coming out of the All-Star break. If he bounces back fine there, obviously that increases the trade value. If not, it completely tanks the trade value.
Jack Flaherty has 2 more starts left as a Detroit Tiger. There's no possible way he's throwing within 4 or 5 days of the trade deadline. We can forget about that. Very important that he throws, not just well, but just the data and the metrics of how it makes it seem his health is pretty much everything. So I'll be very interested to see how he does and what transpires and Scott Harris's capacity to make a good deal for him. All right, yesterday, Kenta Maeda, an absolute revelation. I kept flipping my head over to look at the scoreboard yesterday to my right, and I kept seeing 92.7, 93.2, 93, 93.7. I was like, what's going on here? Because Kenta Maeda, unless they moved him 2 feet forward on the mound, is now throwing 93.7. What's going on, Evan Petzold?
Mark, we made it almost all the way through the All-Star break, and you're calling him Kenta Maeda. We got so close.
Kenta Maeda.
I'm messing with you, man. I'm messing with you. I hope our listeners out there enjoy that. No, man, look, yeah, he was dominant, man. That was some good stuff. That's everything that you want to see and more from Kenta Maeda. It's like, imagine if he would have been that way as a starting pitcher, how things might have been different for both him and the Tigers this season. This is a guy who had a 7.26 ERA in 16 starts, and the Tigers moved him to the bullpen. That was really the big news of the week. I mean, this is a guy who 2 years, $24 million, getting paid $14 million in 2024, $10 million in 2025, and the Tigers make the decision to move him to the bullpen after a terrible, terrible start against the Cleveland Guardians. He got absolutely rocked. It was 6 innings over 2 2/3. And then he gets an opportunity to pitch against the Dodgers in a bullpen-only game. And my goodness, 3 2/3 scoreless innings, no walks, 5 strikeouts. The only hit was to Shohei Ohtani, and it was because he lined it. It was a ground ball, but he lined it right past Zach McKinstry there at shortstop. If Javi Baez is playing shortstop, that might have been an out in that situation. And again, this could have been this could have been 3 2/3 perfect innings from Kenta Maeda out of the bullpen. The stuff played up. It was incredible. The velocity on all of his pitches, they were up. Every secondary pitch seemed like it was more sharp. The slider, he didn't throw a ton of them, but the ones that he threw were excellent. I thought the splitter was a lot better. It's everything that the Tigers have wanted. Like when they sent him to the bullpen, the point was like he needs to go there and he needs to find some fixes and make some adjustments. And, it really comes down to getting the command of his pitches again, being able to locate the fastball, not leaving pitches over the middle of the plate. It wasn't really about velocity. It's more about command, but he was letting it eat out of the bullpen. Maybe Scott Harris has found himself a long-term bullpen piece. I mean, maybe he accidentally signed a reliever to a 2-year, $24 million contract because Kenta Maeda looks really good out of the pen. He's going to stay in the pen coming out of the All-Star break. He did not earn himself another opportunity to start. But if he does more and more of this moving forward, he's going to find his way back into the rotation. It's just going to be about making this kind of stuff happen, when he's pitching in the rotation. He can't just be, only a good bullpen pitcher when you're making $24 million. You got to be able to do it out of the rotation.
Hey, look, I'll tell you a couple things that were beautiful to see at the ballpark yesterday. The smile on Kenta Maeda's face as he walked off after 3 2/3. I couldn't decide.
To a standing ovation.
The level of both relief and happiness on his face was one of the best things I've seen this season. Hats off to the guy. Really, I'm sure the feeling had to be great. The other thing that we haven't discussed that I want to touch on for a minute, the Detroit Tigers drew 113,000 people to the ballpark for 3 days against the Los Angeles Dodgers. The makeup of the crowd was absolutely phenomenal. There were so many people from Japan or of Asian descent in the park to see Shohei Ohtani, who was worth the price of admission every single day. The greatness was off the chain. A couple of bats Friday night, they got him out early, but it seemed like from the last at bat Friday night until I had to make sure he got on the plane. I went to the airport to make sure he got on the plane yesterday, because if he hit a line drive, it felt like every single at bat, starting with his last at bat Friday night, it was unbelievable. I've now seen him in person twice. He is the greatest baseball player I have ever seen. It is a joy to watch him play, but the amount of happiness he brought to all these Dodger fans, there were so many people that were so happy watching Kenta Maeda, Shohei Ohtani. It was awesome. It was awesome to see the park full. It was awesome to see how much fun people had in the park. First time all year besides opening day. And hopefully after Christopher Ilitch has now gone to Atlanta and saw his own ballpark this weekend, he kind of understands what it's supposed to look like. And maybe he can try to encourage his staff to do the things that are necessary, not just spending a little bit more money, but being more aggressive to have an actual baseball team that's good all the time, because that atmosphere was a 10. And I know even upstairs behind the glass, you could kind of feel what I was discussing these last 3 days, couldn't you?
Yeah, it was a fun atmosphere, man. There's nothing like Shohei Ohtani when he's in town.
Yeah, it is a crazy, crazy, crazy fun party. And if you missed it, I would encourage you to go see Shohei Ohtani. It is something. All right. We want to say a little shout out and congrats to something that was kind of underrated this weekend, which was Ryan Vilade was damn good. He seemed to be in the middle of a lot more stuff, hitting ninth than you think he should have been, and hit his first major league home run, laid a big bunt down last night, and pretty much took good at bats almost every time up. He added to the mix. He added more to the mix in 3 days than Akil Baddoo did in 5 weeks. So that was a good thing to see, right?
Yeah, and I'm pretty much done with Akil Baddoo at this point. When you look at what he's done, I mean, it's a 117 batting average, 8 walks, 24 strikeouts, 2 home runs in 26 games this year. He's trying to get into the pull side all the time, and he just needs to do a better job of redirecting the ball, taking what teams are going to give him. I mean, when you look at what his production has been, it's a 766 OPS in 2021, a 558 OPS in 2022, a 682 OPS in 2023 when he played in 112 games. And then now this year, a 517 OPS in 26 games here in 2024. I'm about done with Akil Baddoo, especially when you see a guy like Ryan Vilade come up and just have productive quality at bats. And he's a difference maker kind of guy, right? Like, he's going to stay in the fight, going to put up a good at bat. I want to see more Ryan Vilade. I think everybody wants to see more of something new at this point. So I was really happy when the Tigers called him up. Ryan Vilade, also a great guy, by the way. And super cool to see him hit the home run. Like, let's not forget. Ryan Vilade came up in 2021 with the Colorado Rockies. He played 3 games. He went 0 for 6 in 7 plate appearances. And he had to wait until 2024 to get another big league opportunity. Could you imagine getting called up in 2021 and then having to wait until 2024 to play in the big leagues again? And obviously he came up earlier this season with the Tigers, got his first hit, then he got sent back down. Now he's back up and he got the first big league home run. He was super excited about it. He got the ball, of course, and he's going to be giving it to his parents. I think that's pretty special. It's good to see, new faces have success, here at the big league level. And we'll see what he has coming out of the All-Star break. It's exciting to watch him play. And, he's a fun guy who can do a lot of everything. He can play in the outfield. He can play in the infield. right-handed hitter who's pretty good against lefties, but can defend himself against righties. 25 years old, former second-round pick. Yeah, let's see what this guy's got. Let's give him some runway. It's exciting.
Professional at bats. I did get a DM. Somebody said that Ryan Vilade had as nice a hair as Evan Petzold. I told them that was not true. All right, I wanted to ask you about Casey Mize. Do you think he'll make his next start coming out of the break?
Yeah, no, Cater Montero's still going to stay in the rotation and make that start. Maybe one time through, maybe two times through, maybe even three times through. Tigers going to be careful with Casey Mize. It's a hamstring injury. Obviously, they're going to want to take care of him, make sure he's all good. I'm not expecting to see Casey Mize at any point during the upcoming road trip, which is Toronto and then Cleveland. I'm also not expecting to see Parker Meadows, who also has a hamstring issue. Not expecting to see him during the road trip, which again, it's those 3 games in Toronto, then 4 games in Cleveland. We won't see either of those two guys. So no, to answer your question.
All right, so you're going to get another bullpen day unless they decide to promote Matt Manning, who threw 6 scoreless yesterday for his first good start since, I think, Halloween of 2023. Talk to me about the injury to Javi Baez and what it means and how quickly they're going to have to decide if he's playable coming out of the break.
Yeah, it's going to be wait and see on him, and they're going to have to figure that out. The hope is that he's going to be able to play coming out of the All-Star break, and he just needs some time to rest his back. The problem is that this guy just returned from a lower back injury. He came back for the series opener against the Cleveland Guardians at Comerica Park. That was last Monday, and he played 6 games, started 5 of them, and he's already got another back injury. That's not good. So the fact that it was a back injury, he comes back, and now he's got another issue. Now, the issues are not related. It's not the same, issue that he had before, but it's still another back injury. And so that's concerning to me. The fact that he felt like he could play defense, but he didn't feel like he could swing the bat, that's not good. So we're going to see, hopefully, after some treatment over the All-Star break, he's able to come back and play. Kind of the same thing for Mark Canha, who's dealing with the wrist injury. He needs treatment over the All-Star break. We'll see if Mark Canha is going to be able to play. The Tigers come back from the break Friday against the Blue Jays in Toronto. But again, for Javi to come back, play in all 6 games, start in only 5 of them, and then leave Saturday's game with another back injury is definitely concerning. Same thing concerning for Mark Canha, who's dealt with a hip injury a lot of the season. It's been a little bit of an on and off thing. And then he leaves Saturday's game with a right wrist injury. We'll see if either of those two guys are able to play on Friday, but it's definitely something to monitor.
All right. Before we get out of here, let's talk a little bit about the strategy that Connor and Metzler have employed drafting high school players. It's pretty consistent with what they did both in Tampa Bay and in San Diego. And for those of you that, don't understand what I'm referring to, Scott Harris probably has a lot of input on the Tigers' first pick in the first round of the draft. Afterwards, it's probably almost all the Tigers scouting department running the draft and making the picks. Is that a fair way to say it there, Evan Petzold, or not?
I would assume so.
Okay. So in the last 2 years, 5 of their first 6 picks have been high school players. And in fact, last year, they had a pretty heavy concentration even after their first 3 picks of high school players. So obviously, it's part of the strategy of how they're doing things now. Talk to me a little bit about that. And we also have to address the fact that probably all 3 of these picks, and I don't want to get too deep into the woods about this, but they're going to probably pay over slot and use most of their bonus pool on these first 3 picks. So it's going to start affecting today or after the 3rd round how they're going to pick, because they have to figure the money aspect of how much they're going to pay these draftees. So you may have to draft some guys maybe a little earlier than you wanted to because they would be less expensive to sign. So let's talk about that just for a second so people understand what's going to go on. And when you listen to this, you'll probably understand much better because they'll have been done drafting. So go ahead, Ev.
So yeah, Mark, it's actually 7 of the 8 picks. When you talk about high school draftees, it's 4 of the first 5 picks in 2023, they were high school kids. And then the first 3 picks in 2024, they were high school kids. That's 7 of 8. actually. And if you want to look at the actual names of it, it was Max Clark, Kevin McGonigal, Paul Wilson, and Carson Rucker in the 2023 draft, with Max Anderson, a college kid from Nebraska, smacked in between those, those 4 high school guys. And then if you look at what they've done this season, Bryce Rainer, Owen Hall, and Ethan Schiefelbein, 3 high school players. Yeah, I think it's interesting really to look at the fact that the Tigers have invested in an up-the-middle foundation more so than anything. Like, I do think that, trying to get high school guys, sure, that fits into like, the Mark Connor and the Rob Metzler style of drafting. But I also think it's interesting that the Tigers under Scott Harris have invested in an up-the-middle core. Max Clark to play center field, Kevin McGonigal to play second base, and Bryce Rainer to play shortstop. I think that's pretty fascinating. An up-the-middle foundation. Now, when can we expect those guys to arrive? Maybe it's 2026, 2027, 2028, and maybe that's more of Scott Harris's timeline. We've talked about this a lot. What is the timeline for Scott Harris to win? You look at his contract, how long he's going to be here for. Scott Harris is going to be here for a while. Like, the contract is a long contract. So when you look at where things are headed for the Tigers into the future, and you look at when is the pressure going to be on Scott Harris to really deliver a winner, well, it's probably when his up-the-middle foundation, Clark, McGonigal, Bryce Rainer, have arrived. And so I think that's kind of fascinating when you consider, some of the top of the draft picks that they made over the last 2 seasons. And then, in terms of the slot bonuses, Bryce Rainer, a Texas commit, Owen Hall, a Vanderbilt commit, Ethan Schiefelbein, a UCLA commit. Those are all 3 guys the Tigers had to pay over slot for to pry them away from their college commitments and get them where they got them in the draft, which maybe means some more 4-year college players that they draft, guys who don't have any eligibility left. That could be the case as we move along here with, rounds 3 all the way through round 20. Maybe that's the route the Tigers go down. So we're probably looking at more underslot deals moving forward, just considering the fact that the Tigers had to spend a little bit more to get their top 3 picks and pry them away from their college commitments.
All right. And let's not forget and give a shout out to the Tigers scouting department. They did, select Jaden Ham in the 6th round last year. He is now a part of quite a few top 100 prospects. That's pretty unusual and something worth noting, that the Tigers have been pretty good at those things that they have not been very good at in the prior regime. All right, Evan, it's time to get the heck out of here. You're going to have a few days after Tuesday to at least enjoy yourself and take a breath. It's been a very, very tiring, taxing first 100 games of the season, and I'm glad you're going to get a few days off. You want to share with everybody what you're going to do before we get out of here, or we're going to keep it a secret and talk about it next week?
Yeah, we'll keep it a secret, but I think it might involve sleep.
That's a good thing. All right. I want to remind everybody to please rate, share, and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts, Apple, Spotify, Amazon, you name it. And you can always find us embedded in every single Evan Petzold article at thefreep.com. They got some great digital subscription deals going. I would encourage you to maybe invest in that. I'd like to thank our editor, Nicole Avery Nichols, our producer, the man who will be working overtime on getting this episode out for sure, Robin Chan. We love you, Robin Chan. Love to my grandson. Love to the spectacular Savannah Petzold, who may be asking Evan Petzold to go back out on the road after this week, after being home for 2 weeks. And until next week, I'd like to say to everyone, peace.